Awesome. Well, thanks for the opportunity. And as Sean said, I know the topics here are often not about cloud security, and this is not a cloud security story. So, I mean, it's part of it. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity to chat. I don't have any slides today. I usually talk with slides just because they help me with the story. But I'm just gonna chat with about my journey from CISO to COO. So, Chief Operating Officer is a role that I moved into last August at the company I'm at. And most CISOs that I know, or I should say, even a lot of security professionals, have a love-hate relationship with operations. And I was one of them. I really hated operations. I had such a negative view of it, what it meant. I thought it was just like the most boring part of anything you can do. I mean, after all, it's operations, same thing, right? That's how I perceived it. And so this is more of a story about how I stopped seeing operations as the boring stuff and started seeing it as a lever for scale, trust, and innovation. So I just want to talk today a little bit around how I made the transition, some of the inner shifts for me in terms of how I saw myself, what I learned about myself, and just to be frank, some of the leadership challenges I'm still struggling with, in this role. And if there's questions as we go, don't you don't have to raise your hand. Just you can just interrupt me. It'll probably be better that way than me just talking on a monologue. So. Um,
We're definitely interrupt driven here. That is definitely the bit.
I remember that from last time. I was actually like, oh, we really are an interrupt driven group. And I was like, all right, that's kind of cool. Because usually you ask people that and people never interrupt you. And anyway, feel free to feel free to interrupt. Um, just a quick background on myself. So I started in the 90s hacking like on BBSs, right? Started my cutting my teeth on Unix. And then, did that all throughout junior high, high school, throughout college. Really pissed off the people at my university with some of the havoc I caused on the network. Funny story, I went back to my university about 5 years ago, and the head of IT there was still there. The guy's been there like 40 plus years. And I actually told him about one of the incidents they had. He's like, "That was you?" Yeah, it was pretty funny. It was a really funny interaction. But anyway, after college, I worked for Johnson and Johnson for a number of years as a Solaris admin, and that's really where I started getting into formally into cybersecurity. I did that for a number of years, number of different companies. Deloitte for a number of years. I got to really see a bunch of different aspects of different industries, different businesses, and that's really where I got into cloud as well. So this was the early days of Amazon back when they only had two services. They had EC2 and I think S3. I think it was only two services at the time. And just like now for AI, by the way, people are all scared about AI. Back then, when cloud was first starting, everybody was scared of cloud. Everybody in IT thought, I'm going to lose my job. I'm not going to have a job. I really remember the tangible fear that people had, which now in retrospect kind of seems silly. Um, but anyway, there was a tangible fear there, and that's really where I got into it at Deloitte into the early days. And that led me down a path, getting into cloud, being one of the first people in the world. I think at the time, Cloud Security Alliance had a challenge to be one of the first 100 in the world to get I think it was like cloud certificate of security knowledge, something like that. And I was like, I want to be one of the first 100 in the world. And so I did. So somewhere I'm immortalized on their website, probably 1,000 pages deep now. But that was really my first foray into cloud back in the 2007-ish range, somewhere in there. Um, Now along that journey, at one point I actually left cyber. You probably can't really tell it if you look at my LinkedIn profile. I kind of minimized it, but I actually stepped out of cyber when I joined eBay for a number of years. I kind of got tired of just doing cyber. It was just, I don't know, it felt rote. And for my personality style, I struggled to do something that I am not enjoying for any long period of time. And I stepped out of it for about 3 years when I was an architect at eBay. And at that same time, I actually started a real estate business on the side because I just thought, you know what, maybe I'll just like do real estate, build a portfolio, and, you know, just go off and do that. And that was great experience from an operations perspective. But I realized after doing that for, in parallel with my career for about 13 years, I realized that I really missed cybersecurity after about 2 year, 18 months, 2 years in, part of these big projects, seeing security completely missed from the beginning till almost the last part where the security team would come in at the end. I got to see what it looked like from a developer perspective. And what pulled me back, really into cyber, it was building. I really missed building things from a security perspective, and that's where I really got into startups. That's where I met Sean actually. So at Redlock back in the day, that was my first startup that I had joined, and I'd always worked with startups, buying their tech as a buyer, and I was always just interested in that their culture. It seemed so cool. I didn't really care about ping pong tables and all that, but just the ability to how fast they would move, right? How fast they would react, the customer, the focus, the lack of, at least the perceived lack of bureaucracy looking from the outside in. And that's why I joined my first startup, and it was everything that I thought it would be. It was truly amazing. Long story short, I was at Redlock for a short period of time, got acquired by Palo Alto, and I was there for a number of years, and it was a really good experience. But after being there for a number of years, I was like, I want to go back to this startup thing again. And then I joined a company where I am today called Cerby, which is in the identity security space. It's identity security for disconnected apps. And I've worn a couple different hats since I've been there. Again, you can't tell from my title on LinkedIn. It's always been Chief Trust Officer, but I've actually worn three different hats. So I joined pre-seed. So it was really early, very, very small when I joined. There wasn't product market fit. There was absolutely no paying customers when I joined. There was just a handful of design partners. And when I first joined, I actually came on with helping with product strategy and marketing, like how we talk about the product. And I had never done marketing before. Again, I had worked at startups and I had always been a buyer of cybersecurity products. So it was a shift for me in that I wasn't doing hands-on security anymore. And I started to see things from the other side of the equation. So I did that for about probably 18 months. And then for about a year after that, I was in a field CISO role. And then I was bringing us up where we are today. Since last August, I moved into the COO role. Now, it didn't start with the job title. I had already been doing for Cerby all along the way strategy, right? What are our company targets, OKRs? I started our patent program around our intellectual property. And I mentioned some of the other things I was doing. And it was funny is, this is where I think the power of advisors or just a confidant, somebody that's, a couple years beyond you in terms of experience, maybe even 10 years beyond you in terms of experience, can be really impactful from a mentorship perspective. I was really blessed at Cerby. I have this one advisor, I won't say her name, but she's phenomenal. She's, just probably one of the most brilliant people I know. And she's an advisor for the company. I meet with her every other week. I get 90 minutes with her and I value that time. And what was funny is as I worked with her over the last almost 2 years now, she said to me one day, she said, she said, you're doing COO work. Do you realize that? And I was like, what do you mean I'm doing COO work? And she started going through all the different initiatives that I had built in the company, the problems that I was attempting to solve. And I remember saying to her, yeah, but COO, that sounds kind of boring. Like you're the chief of operations. Sounds really boring. And what she changed was the way I saw it, in that she's like, operations isn't about doing the same thing over and over. It's about improvement, continuous improvement. And this is where I started to connect with some of the self-assessments that I have done over the last 20 years. Like I've done them all, discs, the Myers-Briggs, things like that. And for me, those two, like they weren't really helpful, but there were two specific assessments that I've done in the last 15 years that really changed both how I perceive myself, but also how I started to craft my career over the last 10 years. And one of them is called Standout. So Standout's probably been around for over 10 years now. You can actually take it for free. It used to be an assessment that you had to pay for. It was created by Marcus Buckingham. He's the one who created StrengthsFinder. So stand out. Highly recommend that one. It'll tell you your primary role and then your secondary. And when I took that, it told me that my primary strength was being a pioneer, and that kind of struck me as like, really, pioneer. Tell me more about that. And then the second one was advisor. And when I realized that, as I kind of really worked through the assessment over a couple months, assessment only takes a couple minutes, but there's some follow up things you can do. Was I started to see that for most of my career, I had been playing in my secondary strength, which was the advisor, and not in the pioneering side. So that was like one of the first things that started, going back a little bit, it started me pivoting, like looking at roles, like how do I start to do more of the entrepreneurial, more of the pioneering? And I was getting some of that in the real estate business that I mentioned I had built, like being able to start something from scratch. So that was the first one, stand out. That was a really impactful assessment for me. Go ahead, Sean.
Matt, um, I wanted to double click on the mentorship angle of what you're talking about because, I mean, if I could tell people one thing here, it's like seek out a mentor. It's this opportunity to network here is actually an opportunity to help, connect mentors to mentorees. It's a game changer in your career to get like straight feedback from somebody who's watching what you're doing, how you're doing it, how you behave and react, and those things. And if you can get mentorship and feedback from somebody who you aspire to be or somebody who you trust, I mean, my God, in my career, I had the same thing way back in the early days. I'm talking Novell, in the early days of Novell, a guy named Dan Lynch who started Interop. Um, he took me under his wing and he guided my career in ways that had huge impact, right? He had me lay out the first network for Interop. He made me join Exodus. He literally forced me to join Exodus Communications, which was a life changer for me. But there's things that your mentors do sometimes seemingly against your will, right? Like Matt, you're talking about like, I'm not a COO. What are you talking about? Right. And mentors open your eyes to things that the possibilities that you didn't consider or that your brain isn't tracking on. I mean, it's just invaluable resource if you can find a mentor. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, I'm glad you went back to that because, there was a book I read, and I think I mentioned this last time I spoke here. It's called Never Eat Alone. I think it's Guy Farazi, I think, who wrote it. Great book. And that also changed just how I saw approaching what would be typically called networking, right? But I call it more of mentorship. And after I read that book, I started a practice of, and I read that probably almost a decade ago, of just reaching out to people that I thought were interesting on LinkedIn and just saying, like, hey, can we chat? And what I found is that 60-ish% of people will, once they see like, hey, you're not trying to sell them something and you're just truly interested in like career journey and things like that, most people will are happy to hop on a Zoom for 30 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, and just ask them questions. And I've done that consistently now for many years. And now most of those are just like one-time connects, but there's a handful of them that have just, kind of stuck, especially people that are local in my area, out in the Philadelphia area. There's people now that I'd meet with, on a monthly basis that have just been really huge, and just helping. And as Sean said, probably the biggest benefit is, especially as they get to know you, they can often bring insights that you just would likely never see about yourself, and you may not even get from the people you work with on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, that's it's so crucial. I think a lot of people struggle in their careers because they don't have that kind of guidance. And my advice is seek it out, seek it out.
Yeah, and I know some companies have like formal mentorship programs, and at least my personal experience with those is they don't usually work out that well. But maybe it's because they weren't run very well. Companies I was at, but I think if you, as Sean said, find people that you think are interesting, just reach out to them. Just be honest. I think most people will generally give you some time in terms of it. And especially if you're reaching out to an executive, think of it more in terms of exchanging time for value. You might think like I have nothing that I could potentially bring this person, but that's not really true. It's not really true. It doesn't matter where you're at. There is something that's valuable in that two-way conversation. So don't discount yourself.
Uh, that's a super point, Matt, because actually, uh, honestly, the reason Cloud Security Office Hours started is because I could not scale the mentoring, right? Like I was mentoring people one on one, and I thought, oh my God, I'm killing myself trying to keep up with this, but I can't stop it. But the value side from the giver, like the person who's mentoring, is actually the mentoring. When you see somebody grow, that is such an immense satisfaction to the person who's being the mentor. That I mean, like Matt said, don't discount the value. You don't come with no value to a person, right? Like if you can actually help them grow, that's something that makes your heart grow as a
Oh yeah.
mentor, right? Anyway, I see a couple of hands up, and that's great. I love it when the discussions start. So, Nicolette, go ahead.
Good morning, Matt. Thanks for your time today. The first question I had is regarding that relationship building. I found it very curious when you were talking about the relationship with operations,
Mm.
which I think many of us know firsthand. Perhaps you can deep dive into how you broke down those barriers and became more of an alliance, and in your role at, as chief trust officer, and then in your current role, like how did you break down those barriers? And as you're thinking through that answer, I just want to also, as an aside, say that for mentoring, I do virtual coffee hours like on Fridays, right? I found that very effective in my network because I was just spreading myself too thin as well, Sean. So I think many of us can relate to that. So I'll pause there. Matt, over to you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, as a CISO, there's a certain amount of authority that you have where at least the people that are in your reporting structure, you can so to say, tell them what to do, give directives. But what I've noticed, especially being in, we just raised our Series B last week, so I don't really consider us an early stage company anymore. But we're about 105, 110 employees. But as COO, it's not like I have I only have like 3 or 4 direct reports. And so most of the people that I'm working with, I don't lead with authority, right? I might have a COO title, but I can't be like, hey, do this, do that. That really wouldn't work anyway. And so what I've had to do is, and this is one of the things 25 years of experience still learning is how to lead with influence. And what I've found is that most leaders are much more receptive if you are bringing them insights, right? And as COO, my job is really to bring insights to every area of the business, from R&D to finance to product to engineering, right? And a lot of my experience is, it's obviously on the cybersecurity side, but I've been spending a lot of time over the last year really digging into R&D and helping them to build dashboards to look at efficiency. Because go to market, we have all kinds of different metrics. We've got CAC payback, we've got NDR, we've got all these things, but there's not a really good like universal statistics around R&D. So just helping our CTO, our VP of engineering, to really think differently about their business in terms of efficiency, AI use, things like that. That's one of the things that I've found that most leaders, if once they realize like, hey, this person is bringing me value, they're going to help me be better. They're not telling me what to do. That's one of the ways that I've found to really kind of break down that barrier.
Thank you, Matt.
Jay, I see your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, Matt. I hope this is not taking you off any sort of prepared statement, but I'm fascinated by the idea of like going from cyber into like marketing field, CISO, and especially COO. And my question is that in what sense has sort of the relative importance of security changed in your perspective by now being COO and not razor focused on cyber, as well as the, COO functions as enabling business, of course, also gives you a broader idea of what the value is of the things that in the past you protected, right? Like,
Yes.
can you talk about that?
Yeah. I think it's actually given me a greater appreciation for what I think in the past maybe I was trying to achieve on the cybersecurity side, but just quite frankly was just too siloed to maybe even see. So now as COO, right, I don't directly own cybersecurity for the company, but it's one of those pieces that, over the last year, I've still driven certain things. Given my background, if there's somebody new at the company, they may not realize it. They're like, how does he know to ask that question? You know, it's kind of, I love to be able to do that. I remember doing that at eBay too, when I wasn't in the cybersecurity role, when we were building things, I would ask questions. And I actually had someone come to me, one of the architects, he's like, how did you know to ask those questions? I was like, well, I did cybersecurity for a decade before this, right? So to your question, I look, I think I place much more emphasis now on OPSEC than I did when I was, in a CISO role, where I knew that was kind of important, but I was much more involved into the minutia of certain things. And when we can look at almost any cybersecurity study research report, and almost always shows the things that get companies in the headlines is rarely a 0-day. It's usually like cybersecurity hygiene 101, which is operations. That's operations, doing the really boring things extremely well and being able to measure. And I think being able to measure is one of the things that we don't really do well in cybersecurity. But I can tell you, being on the operations side, being really close to like go-to-market stuff for the last couple of years, go-to-market can measure everything, everything. Starting when you come to Cerby's website, guess what? We know who you are, right? We know who you are. We can de-anonymize you, and we can do all kinds of things and track you through your whole journey. Like trying to get that level of detail, like in product and engineering, is much harder, and that's one of the things I'm learning to, again, try to bring insights rather than going to our CTO or somebody else in the engineering saying like, hey, you need to be doing these things. That doesn't work. But bringing insights, like how does it connect what you're doing to board level objectives?
That's awesome. I love that. I also fully agree with like the boring keeps us safe.
It does, unfortunately.
Striker.
I genuinely completely forgot my question. I'm really sorry. I didn't take my meds this morning. Love
Well,
y'all.
good morning anyway.
Good
Good
morning.
morning to
Well,
all of y'all, people too.
well, if you remember it, you remember it?
No, but I did have an observation as somebody who spent 10 years in marketing doing all of those things. It's still really hard. You can collect all of these metrics, and this is just a reminder to anybody, because I know we're all having calls for quantifying things. I'm working with my team on that right now. Quantify your threat intel briefing, great. The impact of it, and that's the secondary part there, is that you can have all of these metrics, but it means diddly shit if you can't connect it back to the actual goals, or the metrics themselves become the goal itself rather than a metric analyzing the goal. So it doesn't matter how many goddamn people you have visiting the website if you can't show that you're converting those people into the okay, shut up. Thanks, Sean. I'm just saying, metrics are great and we need them, and by God, I fucking miss all of my metrics for trying to evaluate and put together dashboards for my team. But remember, when you're collecting the metrics, you need to make sure that you understand what they're actually measuring, what it's a proxy for, what it's an indicator of, and keep your eye on the actual goal of like producing it faster or making more money or keeping you safer. Like they're all proxy and correlative measures. I forgot my actual question, but that's my soapbox, and I'll get off it. I'm sorry.
That's awesome. Don, I see your hand up. I was hoping you would raise your hand, Don.
Yeah. So random question that kind of corresponds to the topic today. Sometimes if you like navigate to applying for jobs and stuff, companies will be searching for like a COO or a CISO in like a job description, but do people actually like apply to those roles, and is that actually how companies like find their C-suite, or is it really like they have a targeted list of people that they'd like to go after? I guess it's one thing if you grow into the role from within the company, but it's something exceptionally different if someone changes from one org to the other, and it kind of seems like I don't want to say an exclusive class, but how exactly does one break into it externally, if ever?
I mean, I think my experience has been like I get these emails all the time from certain like boutique recruiting agencies that are like, exclusive COO search or, whatever. I've personally never gotten a job through any of those types of things. It has been through networking. As I mentioned, going back, like having those casual lunches or virtual coffees or whatever it is. The way I got the role at Redlock, my first true C level title was I pitched myself directly to Varun, who is the CEO and founder. I think I posted I saved the LinkedIn thing where I pitched myself to him just to remind myself, right, of it. I posted it on LinkedIn a couple of years ago as part of it. But that's been my experience. Now I know for like, Fortune 1000, a lot of Fortune 1000 companies, they often will do like private searches. You're probably not going to see those publicly posted is my guess. So, but maybe for outside Fortune 1000, I'd love to hear others experience on that.
I was asking on behalf of Sean Nunley because he's technically the CEO of Cloud Security Office Hours. I think that qualifies him for some other roles.
Wow, I didn't even know. I didn't even think of that. That must be why I get so many weird emails now from people who think I'm the founder of Wiz, because it has, I'm at Wiz and I also have founder of Cloud Security Office Hours, and they're always trying to sell me things at the CEO level. I'm like, yeah, you didn't do your research very well, pal.
I got a question for Matt.
Yeah.
Right. And so I remember having a one-on-one with you after your last call, right? And this was before you got into your current role, right? And you talked about it was very ambiguous, right? You said that you were looking at making that shift, but there were some things you needed to achieve first, right? And then you kind of maybe unintentionally glossed over a little bit. You talked about some assessments that you took early on that you just kind of ignored, right? And so there's a lot of right, especially when this upcoming generation and AI and everything, like folks are trying to figure out like whether it's folks that have been in their role and they're just okay, this I don't know, I want to do something different. You seem to have done a really really good job, and I know it's very intentional at just kind of figuring out like, look, I'm gonna maybe take a different step, right? Whether it's your foray into real estate or whether it's going to eBay and now this, right? You seem really good at kind of manifesting like, okay, I'm going to do something somewhat totally different, right? Talk to us more about that internal dialogue, right? Because I think the networking piece is important. You spoke to that, the importance of talking to folks and like having them identify some things you don't identify, but maybe go a little bit deeper into for some folks like, okay, well, how do I go into like figuring out a whole other path? Because you seem to be masterful at that, but I know that there's a lot of work put in the background, right? It's not quite that easy.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's a really good question. You know, let me bring this back to an assessments for a second, just because they have been so pivotal to my intentionality. So I mentioned standout. The second one is the Enneagram. The Enneagram got really popular the last like 5 or so years. I did it probably 8 or so years ago. I listened to this book, The Road Back to You. Really great book. And for the first time in my life, I remember I was listening to the audiobook. I was driving, and he was going, he starts out the beginning of each chapter talking about each type, and he's basically it's like almost like an opening monologue on each type. And I'm a one, which it's either the perfectionist or you can call it the improver. I prefer the improver over the perfectionist. And as he was reading it, I'm driving and I started crying because I had never heard anybody describe my internal thought process like that. And that was like a huge shift for me because I always kind of just laughed like perfectionist, whatever, but I never really went any further than that. So the Enneagram assessment really showed me how I interpret the world. And I remember one thing specifically that he said is like, you can't change how you see things in the world, but you can change how you respond to it. Like once you're aware of how you see things. And so, Chris, to your question, that was part of that intentional transformation is just the way I am is I am an improver. Like that's just I sometimes I wish I wasn't. Sometimes I wish I could turn off. Being I naturally see what's wrong with the world, like what's wrong, or at least what I perceive to be wrong. And I grew up crazy background, difficult kind of family life growing up, which is obviously part of that. But I think I've always been intentional because I was always just trying to figure out like how do I become who I'm supposed to be? And that's just like I'm data driven person, so it's assessments, but it's not just I think the first time I ever took an assessment was right out of college when I was at Johnson and Johnson. They gave us we were all required to take I think it was the Myers-Briggs assessment, and I read it. I was like probably 21 at the time, and I never did anything with it. I was like, this is useless, and I just put it to the side. And when I realized as I did them later, it's like if you're going to do an assessment, yes, but you have to like read it over time. Don't just read it one time. Read it, come back to it, read it, journal on it, and like you will begin. I remember telling people like, "Hey, it says this," and them being like, "That is totally you," and me going like, "What?" And that's again, we're having like that circle of people that you can talk to who know you is really important. So it was very intentional. And I remember reading something at some point saying that as you move along in your career and you become hopefully more self-aware, you can begin to craft what you do to be less of what you are not good at or less of what you don't like and more of what you do like. And so it has been very intentional. It has been very intentional, but there's also a certain amount of I think just being blessed along the way as well. I don't want to say like it's all me, right?
Yeah.
I believe in God and I believe that like certain of these things have been put in the way along the way, regardless of the screw ups that I've made along the way as well.
Right on. Appreciate that.
Matt, kind of a off the wall question. So all those badges behind you hanging on the door, tell more.
Yeah, that is a couple years worth of just conferences and
Conferences.
yeah, so that's not like just last year's, by the way. I also I started just I think I came when I was at Palo, I was traveling like a ton, and I would just come home and just hang them, and then people started asking me about them, and I was like, oh, this is also a good conversation piece. So I've just put them there over the last couple of years, and I'd say that about 30 to 40% of the time, if I'm meeting somebody and like in a first time, they almost always ask. So it's just a good conversation piece.
It is. It's almost, I'm an Air Force vet. And so, I've got coins from every base, every command I've held and places I've been. And it's a good memory too of conferences. So I thought it might've been like marathon related or something.
No, it's not. I am a fitness buff, but that has
Yeah.
nothing to do with physical fitness.
Fitness.
And you're right. There are certain memories attached with when I was just looking at there's this really cool, I just missed it here. This red one,
Mhm.
that's from B-Sides Philly a number of years ago. And my daughter came with me when she was like 7 to that. And she was at the time, she was like the only female at the entire event. It was like 200 dudes and my 7-year-old daughter. And she still talks about it. She's 15 now. And
Good on you.
they gave her a special badge that digitally had her name on it. So it was really cool. So that has a good memory with it.
That's awesome. Good on you.
Can I ask a quick question, Matt, or two-part question? I know you were talking a lot about operations earlier, and I'm
Mhm.
a little bit earlier in my career, and I don't really know the difference between like a cybersecurity analyst and a operations analyst. Because I
Mm.
recently got an email for an interview for a cyber operations analyst, and like I'm a little bit embarrassed. I don't really know what the difference is, and
Well,
maybe the second part of the question, I know you got a lot of value, as you were saying, from those personality assessments.
mhm.
Um, do you think like it's useful to tie that in with the job descriptions that you see, like the requirements and the duties you'll perform? Like, are those already tied into these assessments, or do you think we could do a better job at seeing if your personality can be aligned with a particular cybersecurity sub role?
That's a good question. Your first one was like cyber ops analyst versus what was the other one?
Just cybersecurity analyst.
Okay. I'll give you my take on that, and then I'd love to hear what others think about it. So, cyber ops analyst versus cybersecurity analyst. It's going to really, I think, depend on the company. I think cyber analyst a lot of time is just a catch-all for a entry level cybersecurity role. That's typically what it is. The fact that they add ops to the other one, maybe it's specifically in a SOC. I don't know. That what I would look at, what do they say in the JD, compare the two, take both JDs, throw them in GPT, and like, what's the delta with these? What's the company? And then obviously when you're talking to the recruiter, that'd be one thing to really dig into. But the titles are often used very interchangeably, at least from what I've seen.
Mhm.
To the second part, tying assessments into JDs, job descriptions, I would absolutely encourage you to do it. Now, do not make them like your sole, like don't make the choice just on that. Well, it doesn't match my personality profile, right? Because that's very like a very binary type thing. I would say that it's a signal, and I think it's a very important one, but it shouldn't be the only signal, right? Like you could find a job description on paper that looks like a perfect match to your personality profile, but then your boss is an ass or the company has a horrible culture. So those are like, there's a kind of a rainbow of choices that I would look at. I would also say, like in my experience, like as you gain more experience in your career, that does give you more freedom to, I don't want to use the word dictate, but negotiate like what you do. And early in your career, you really don't have that much. But as you gain experience and people start to recognize your experience, you get rewarded, yes, usually with more money, but you can oftentimes, what's more important than the money is being able to do more of what you want and less of what you don't want. So that's the other thing. I know people always say, salary is not, the most important thing. Is, well, the truth is for most people, it's very important, right? You got to live on it. You got to hopefully one day retire on it. But I'd say that the thing that brings you brought me at least, is bringing me the most fulfillment is not the cash and the equity, but it's like what I'm doing, right? Because there's some days, and this goes for any job, but especially in startup world, where I work I work way more in startups than I did when I was in Fortune 500 companies, way more. But why do I work way more? It's not because my boss is like, hey, are you still online at 7 o'clock? Like, why aren't you online? No, it's because I can see in a startup much more of the impact that I'm having that I could never see when I was at a Fortune 500 company.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, if there's other questions, I'd love them. I think,
I think
I'll
Neil
talk.
had a question. I saw his
Oh,
hand go up and then it went down. Did you have a question, Neil?
I did not have a question. I was going to comment on the mentoring. I think, Sean, you started down this path, but one important thing I've always felt is as a mentor, I'm getting hopefully usually as much out of it as the people I'm mentoring. And that drives me. I'm fundamentally a selfish person. And so I was going to kind of joke. Amy mentioned that both Matt and I have mentored her, but for me, it's been such an interesting relationship. And I probably should ask Amy's permission, but I'm just going to tell you this a little bit. Amy's from marketing. And she and I have been meeting, 2 years now, give or take. And what it started with is she came to my boss at the time and said, well, I know marketing, but I don't know the technology. And I really want to know what I'm talking about and what I'm doing. Fantastic. Like you get my heart right off, right? But it's been such an interesting relationship for me because every time we talk, I find myself having to examine assumptions that I've made for 10 or 15 or 20 years and unravel them in order to be able to explain why I know that this is better than that, or this is more interesting than that, or whatever the answer is. I have to pull back and go, hold on. I mean, and that's been invaluable for me to actually understand things better that I know. And really driven that. So I wanted to comment on that and throw that out there. But
That is a great point, Neil. Like, again, like a lot of people are afraid to ask for mentorship. But if you find a willing person, it's because they get a lot out of it, right?
Yes.
It's not a zero-sum game where the mentor is giving all the time and not getting anything. I feel like I'm always getting something out of it. Um, and and there's payoff points too, where like you hit the jackpot and go, oh my God, did you see what that person did? And you kind of helped. And that's huge. It just really is a big deal. I love that point, Neil. Thanks.
There's actually science behind this. It's indirectly related, but I remember reading a couple years ago a book by Liz Wiseman. It's called Rookie Smarts. I think it's like why learning beats knowing. Uh, and I think this is why the kind of the dynamic of, a mentor who is, usually more seasoned and the mentee, why it actually works is which part of what I think she looks at in the book is if you look at oftentimes major discoveries over the last 100 years in various different industries, oftentimes those discoveries have come from a quote unquote rookie or an outsider, a non-expert. The reason being, as Neil was just saying, is that oftentimes someone who's been doing something for decades is often not going to try something because it doesn't work. They don't even try it. It doesn't, because you've done something so long, you don't even try something new. Whereas somebody new comes in, the non-expert, they learn very quickly about things, but they don't know enough to not try something. And that usually ends up being where the discovery is. So I think that same dynamic is often what makes a mentoring relationship a two-way street. And I think, again, if you realize that, you won't think about that relationship as being unequal, but you'll think yourselves like you're just different paths on a journey, and you are likely going to bring value to each other. It may be lopsided, but it doesn't matter. Like you're going to do it. And I think that's why mentorship works. And if it's just not working, then find somebody else. And that's the other thing too. A lot of times, I think, especially like executives that are really busy, I think a lot of times maybe they're fearful to do it because they're like, oh, if I agree to do this, it's going to be forever. And so maybe when after you have a first conversation and you think it might be somebody, maybe just make it clear up front, like, hey, like, if we can just do this for a couple weeks or for whatever, that would be great. And then you just, you kind of take the pressure off of like, hey, this is a forever commitment.
The executive angle is interesting because oftentimes that mentor-mentoree relationship just happens organically because an executive takes an interest in you, right? And it's important to recognize when that happens. Sometimes you don't, or don't realize that what an executive is doing for you is the beginning of like an important relationship, right? Just the mentor-mentoree thing can happen organically. It doesn't have to be something that you go seek out and grow. But some of them, Matt, are lifetime things. The guy I was talking about, Dan Lynch, that was lifetime. He ended up passing away last year. But
Hmm.
from the day I met him till the day he died, I would have conversations with him about things. Brian, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to mention something I found this morning, which I didn't know was online, is there's Grace Harper, the Captain Grace Harper. There's an NSA video of her online. And I just started watching it this morning. And I think a lot of things, even though it was done back in '83, has a lot of pertinence to this sort of thing. She goes through how the command structures in the Navy were changing at the time when this is computers and things coming on board. And it's at least the first hour of it's quite good. I haven't watched the second, but I'm expecting it to be as good as well. I just wanted to draw people's attention to it.
Do you have a link?
Give me a second. I do.
Cool. Neil.
Matt, there was something you said that really resonated with me, and I want to dig in a second because both I have some thoughts and a question. But you said you've participated in corporate mentoring programs, and those have been disappointing. And I've been through that as well. We did that at Red Hat. I was involved in starting one at Orca, and what I realized with the one at Orca, it was structured as, I don't remember, 10 weeks or 12 weeks or something like that. And I remember the CRO was also participating, and he and I were having a side conversation about it. And he was like, this feels really hard because for me, mentoring is about career progression and working with somebody over a period of time. And, this feels antithetical to that. It just doesn't, I'm not sure how it works. And I thought about that and I said, you know what? We're thinking about it wrong. This is a different sort of mentoring. If I've only got 10 or 12 weeks, like maybe that grows into a lifelong relationship where everything is daisies and on. But what if I think about this not as I'm going to guide your entire career, but how can I help you with a real concrete problem today? Something that makes sense to be time bound. So my takeaway was that maybe those mentoring relationships, those structured things that happen in the corporate programs require a different set of thinking about how you mentor and what you get out of them. That was my takeaway. But my question was, what are the things that you've seen wrong in those programs, and what are sort of the problems there? Because there's a lot there, and I think they're offered to people a lot. And I want to see people get value out of them, but I'm not sure that.
When I was at Cognizant, which was at the time almost 300,000 people, it's a massive, massive company. And I remember they had a program, and they matched me with they had like an internal accelerator program where they were trying to incentivize internal like startups, and I was supposed to advise this one startup. I just remember it felt so artificial. And even when the guy that I would meet with would come to the call, it was like, I could tell that he hadn't thought about anything prior to the call. Like he hadn't thought about what he wanted out of it. And almost like I was wasting his time. And so one is just kind of, I think, attitude about it. Maybe Cognizant didn't do a good job in just setting expectations. And to be truthful, we met maybe like 6-7 times, and I eventually just ended it because I was like, I don't think this is valuable for either one of us. So maybe it's just because, in large companies, they always try to so highly structure things, which is probably somebody in operations did. but I don't know. I feel like the best mentorship is probably going to just come organically, right? Like at the end of the day, if you don't like somebody, it's just not a personality match. It's probably not going to be a good mentorship. You've got to like each other, like in any relationship. Yeah. Yeah, like the person that I talked to, the advisor that I work with, like I think, in some ways she's like me, but there are other ways that I'm just like, wow, I wish I could be more like her. So there's something that I aspire to, that I see in her, that makes me want to be like, hey, can we meet for an additional 30 minutes? But I highly look at that time. But I think it's valuable for her too, because she's quote unquote retired. She's probably only in her 50s, but she's retired. But all she does now is like 2 days a week. She dedicates Tuesdays and Thursdays, and she meets with startups. That's all she does, Tuesdays and Thursdays. She travels all the other times. But she's got this wealth of experience, and, not being a day-to-day operator anymore, she's getting value from me, learning like, hey, this is what's currently going on in the B2B SaaS market, right? So there's two-way value.
I think, Matt, like when Matt and I, or Sean and I, or Neil and I had a conversation, like someone reaches out, right? The problem with those corporate programs it's just, it sounds good. It fucking sounds good. Like, oh, mentorship, and like, hey, I want to do that. I want to be of service. And then like, yeah, I want to mentor. And like, that's the problem, right? It sounds good until you actually have to do it, right? Whereas if someone's reaching out on LinkedIn or through some other organic method, it's like, okay, well, I want this and I need this. And it just, I think that's why it tends to have more success, because folks are raising their hand because like, I don't want to be the one leader that puts my hand down because I'm going to look like an asshole, right? So I think sometimes we've all been a part of organizing these things, and you're just like, man, how do I keep it authentic? And maybe the answer is making it about a short-time goal, just access, right? I'm not here to guide you through your journey. Maybe just give you a kickstart. And if it works, right? But I think we've all shared that frustration.
And that's spot on. That's spot on.
I know we're short on time, but I think another way to skin this cat is when people ask me for mentorship, I do two things. One of which I pull them into a volunteer opportunity, right? So are there things that we can work together? So you have your own storyline, your own narrative. So don't look for to become a character in my story. That's no, seriously, like you have your story's worth telling, right? So if we volunteer together, then you'll know, am I the right fit? And then secondly, I'll meet people at O Dark 30 or O Night 30, right? So that's the type of way that if you show up prepared, then that's a relationship you want to build on, right? Because now you have to meet with me early or late. Anyway, thanks for your insights too. I'll certainly employ those into my future activities. So we appreciate you today.
Thank you.
We are at the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of people's time, but great conversation today. It was exactly what I thought it would be. Kind of off topic, kind of on topic, but very, very valuable conversation. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. Spread
Thanks,
the
Matt.
word. We would love to get more people. And Matt, thank you for coming on again. We always love to see you. And I'll grab you again. I'll grab you again next year.
Sounds awesome.
That was really cool.
See you, folks.
Thanks, everyone. We'd love to connect with you.